Hello, my name is Rebecca Simon. On behalf of Shamiram Media, I welcome all our viewers. Our guest today, once again, is Regis Professor Geoffrey Khan. Professor Khan was born in 1958 in United Kingdom to an East Indian father and a British mother. He got his bachelor's degree in Semitic languages, including Akkadian, Aramaic, Arabic, Hebrew, Ethiopian, etc. And then he got his PhD from the University of London. Professor Khan is a professor at the University of Cambridge. He's authored about 20 books and 200 articles. One of his main focuses is to research and document the over 100 Assyrian dialects. Some of them are extinct or near extinction. He is therefore fluent in the Assyrian language. Professor Khan, it's an honor to speak with you again from England. I know it's after hours for you. And thank you very much for joining us again, as our viewers have requested us to speak with you in English. Welcome to Shamiram Media.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Rebecca. I'm delighted to be with you this evening.
Professor Khan, you are known, very well known, for being a very modest, a simple man, very humble. And I would like you to explain to our viewers why it is that you have the word Regis ahead of the word professor. And I want to know if you can explain what Regis signifies.
Well, my chair, my university professorship, or we call it a chair in England, was founded by a king, an English king, namely King Henry VIII, in 1540. And therefore the chair, the professorship, was known as a Regius professorship. That is to say, the professorship of the king, or royal professorship. So it's the case that the chair I have was founded by a king. So though I don't have any special relationship with the royal family, it's simply a historical connection. And there are several, not many, but several royal professorships in Oxford and Cambridge.
It's a rarity. You're one of the rare chairs called Regis professors.
Certain subjects that have royal chairs, others they don't. So it's sort of like,
very well, thank you for that explanation. Professor Khan, you have been born to an East Indian father and a British mother, and nobody was Assyrian in your household. You did not play with an Assyrian child as a child to be learning the Assyrian language, as children easily pick up a language when they're young. And you learned the Assyrian language, and fluently so, for many dialects as an adult, which is really an unbelievable phenomenon. Could you explain to us how you came about learning the language and having the love to learn it?
Well, as a teenager, I was always fascinated by languages. I would try to learn languages from books when I was a child, and particularly as a young teenager of 12, 13, I got very passionate about languages. I was brought up in the northeast of England in a place called Middlesbrough, where as far as I know, there were no Assyrians, so I never met any Assyrians in those days. But it was my love of languages, I think, was the root of what was to lay the groundwork for my later career. When I had to make a decision to go to university at 18, at the end of my school, I had to decide what degree to study for, and my my mother and my uncle, because my father and mother had split up, so I grew up with my mother and English grandmother. So they was advising me, my family was advising me to study something practical, like study medicine, so I could cure people, or study engineering, so I could build buildings. But my heart was very much in languages, so I followed my heart, and which is quite a risky thing to do, to follow your heart sometimes. But looking back now, I realize I made the right decision, because if you want to have a happy life, you have to follow your heart. So I went to. I also felt a motivation to study languages from outside of Europe. I had this feeling that I wanted to explore the world a bit, at least in terms of looking at different languages. I often ask myself why that was the case. I think it was probably because I myself, my background's quite mixed, as you said, and I felt that I didn't really belong very firmly in any very specific community, but I felt I just wanted to learn more about other communities around the world. So I ended up by studying Middle Eastern languages, or Semitic languages specifically. So in London University, I studied the languages of Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Akkadian, Ethiopic were the main languages I learned. Then I went on to do a PhD in those languages, essentially. These were the written classical languages: classical Hebrew, classical Aramaic, classical, obviously Akkadian, ancient language. So I was not, at that time, I didn't learn any modern Assyrian. But after I finished my PhD, in London, almost by chance, I met some Assyrians from Barwar and from Karakosh on the Mosul plain, or the plain of Nineveh, who were living in London. And I would say that those meetings were a life-changing experience for me, because first of all, it's the first time I'd ever heard these languages spoken, and I really found them incredibly beautiful as languages, and my sort of love of languages was very much kindled by these beautiful spoken languages. But then I felt my heart very much moved by when I learned the history of the tragic history of the Assyrians over the last century, how much they'd lost, how they'd lost their homes, how they'd lost their villages, their country indeed. So I felt very moved as a human being towards fellow human beings. My heart was very, very full of compassion, and so I was very moved, very motivated to start to learn these dialects and to actually work on them as a scholar. And I became very aware of the fact that there were many dialects of the Syrian language. It was not a single dialect, there were many dialects of the Syrian language. And the thing which really moved me was the fact that many of them were endangered. That is to say, many of them are in danger of disappearing and being forgotten. So I decided that I would do my best to make it my mission in life to document as many of these dialects as I could, to preserve knowledge of them by recording them and by writing grammars, writing books about the dialect, to preserve knowledge of them. And as I say, there was a sort of an academic and a human motivation to that. I mean, the academic motivation was that these are just beautiful languages, full of interesting things which I'd find in no other language. So, I mean, I should say that, you know, every human language has distinct features in it. So, but you know, these dialects were full of all kinds of interesting things for, you know, for me with my sort of, from an intellectual point of view. But I also saw how important they were for the Assyrian people, for in terms of their culture, their identity, and they're a crucial part of their heritage. And so, since they'd lost so much of their culture, they'd lost their homes, they'd lost their villages, they'd lost their land, I felt that, you know, the thing I could do, I couldn't restore the land or the villages to them, but I could do my best to preserve their linguistic heritage. And I then began to realize that, in fact, this linguistic heritage is in the form of the spoken vernaculars is incredibly ancient. Although these are modern spoken languages, inside them they have very, very ancient words. For example, when I was working on the Barwa dialect, I discovered that even the farmers in the villages of Barwa had ancient Akkadian words in their vocabulary. For example, the farmers who used to sow the fields of rice, they would plant rice in what we call paddy fields up in the Barwa region, for example, near the villages of Enune or Dure. Their paddy fields they would call in their language Mishara, and Mishara is an ancient Akkadian word, which has only been preserved in the mouths of farmers when they were talking about their agriculture. It was never written down. In Karakosh, for example, I found many Akkadian words, like, for example, in Karakosh, when they have a storeroom in the top of the house, in the roof, which they're called Bakhshime. And Bakhshime is an ancient Assyrian word. It goes all the way back to Beit Hashimi in ancient Akkadian, in the northern form of Akkadian, sort of so-called Assyrian Akkadian of the ancient period. So I realized that, you know, many of these ancient words from Akkadian are in the mouths of people speaking dialect. So I always say to Assyrians, you know, your heritage is in your mouth. It's really, that's the place where you'll find it. I mean, is this a more direct link to the past than statues of Lamasa or whatever? If you want to find your ancient heritage, it's in your mouth. And so I realized that this is incredibly important for the Assyrians as a people, and I felt in my heart to do my best to help preserve it for the sake of the well-being of the Syrian people. Another feature about the Syrian dialects is that they are incredibly diverse, as you mentioned, Rebecca, at the beginning. That, you know, there's over 100 dialects, and this diversity should not be regarded as something which splits up the Assyrians into all kinds of different sort of groups, fragments you. It's quite the opposite. When a language has got lots of components, when it's got lots of dialects or a lot of variety, that is a sign that it's ancient. And ancient languages have lots and lots of dialects. And it's like, I like to, you know, compare it to some kind of tapestry of many, many parts. And this is a beautiful tapestry. And it is so, but, you know, the fact that there's so many dialects is a sign of its antiquity. But it also makes it more vulnerable, of course, because you can start to lose parts more quickly because they are the people who spoke different dialects. Of course, some of them are quite small communities, or some of them, or many of them, in fact, are from communities which, had lost their homes many decades ago, since 1915 in the Hakkari. I mean, many of those dialects spoken in the Hakkari are now highly endangered, if not several of them actually have become extinct. So, so I had a sort of intellectual motivation and a human motivation. I should say also that there is a important point about documenting languages, is that, I mean, I realize that this is incredibly important for the Syrian people, but also I have to say that a loss of the Syrian language is a major loss also to humanity, I would say, because every language is a very important, or the most important manifestation of humanity. And every time we lose a language in the world, it is a loss to humanity as a whole, I believe. So it is important not only for the Syrian people to preserve at least a record of the language, but also it's important also for humanity. Now, I'd say that just to continue on some of my experiences. I mean, when I began to get involved with documentation of the language, of the dialects, I found myself having to travel across the whole world to find the Syrians. So, for example, when I worked on the Barwa dialect, I traveled to North America, Chicago, it was particular, and also Australia, various countries in Europe, looking for the older speakers who came from Barwa, and I recorded some of the older speakers, so I was able to really make a record of the entire dialect as it was spoken in Barwa before the village was destroyed. And this dialect, this documentation also involved, crucially, not only words or the language itself, but also oral culture, because what's being lost when these dialects die is not only the language, but also this incredibly rich oral culture which the Assyrian villages had. In particular, folk tales. In the evenings, particularly in the winter, the people in the village would sit around the fire, typically an oven, to keep the oven burning. I often sit on the oven, but then there would be a storyteller in the village, and they would tell stories. And these stories are now all being forgotten, but I managed to find some excellent storytellers from Barwa, for example. I found an excellent storyteller, and I recorded many of the old stories. And these are all preserved in books I published. And so that also is an important part of cultural heritage. So there's more than just language. I should also say that the language, the vocabulary, the words of the language, of course, preserve a lot of the culture of the original villages, which can get rapidly forgotten when the Syrians had to leave and come to America or Australia. In particular, vocabulary relating to the local culture and natural world, which doesn't exist, of course, when you move to another country. So there are all kinds of words relating to agriculture, for example, which I documented from the mouths of these elderly people, which are now, I mean, there might be people in Chicago or Los Angeles now who speak the dialects quite fluently, but it's likely that particularly the younger generation, they won't know a lot of these old words relating to agriculture, for example. So, I mean, I've traveled the world trying to put together this sort of tapestry of Assyrian linguistic heritage, and I've had many experiences. I've had very moving experiences. I found, I mean, one of the things, for example, that I found is that families have become split up across the world. Um, I found in Barwa, for example, I found brothers of a single family split up into 3 different continents. You know, one in London, one in Chicago, one in Sydney. So families are being broken up. I mean, it's not only this tapestry of dialects, it's the people are all split up. So, in a way, by documenting the language, I felt I was obviously not keeping families together, but at least it preserves a knowledge and a memory of a time when the villages were together as a community. I mean, it's almost like a touchstone, we say in English. There's some kind of reference point, some kind of a place where when you document a language, some kind of record of the fact that there was unity and there was a community and what the culture was, and crucially what the language was, because the language is the core of the culture. So that's what I felt. What I was trying to do was also, if you like, help keep communities together, really, because I mean, on a personal note, I'm very much, I have a great emotional motivation to build bridges between people and to keep communities together. It's divisions. I mean, I think it's probably my own personal experience. Probably, I mean, I don't know, because I came from a broken home. I mean, I can speak my personal experience. And I feel I want to keep, I want to build, I want to repair. And this is I think this is talking about, you know, what's motivating me. I think that is one of the motivations. Let me tell you about one of my many experiences. When I've traveled around the world and visited many Assyrian communities, I've always been received very warmly. I think sometimes, occasionally, people don't fully understand what I'm doing, but generally, you know, I've been received incredibly warmly, and I've been very touched. And I think, again, speaking personally, because I think I'm telling you a lot about my personal sort of reaction to this, I felt very much adopted into the Syrian community myself in a way, and that was very moving to me, because I think it gave me a sort of sense of belonging almost, really. And I think, let me tell you about one particularly very moving experience I had when I was documenting some of the dialects spoken by Syrians in the Caucasus. I was spending some time. I traveled to Tiflis in Georgia, trying to find speakers of the dialects of Van and Salamas. And in Tbilisi or Tiflis, there I'd heard that there were some speakers of Salamas who could still speak the dialect very purely. Now, Salamas, I mean, there are speakers of from Salamas, various parts of the world, but the problem is that usually Salamas speakers are mixed Salamas with Urmi. But up in the Caucasus, you can still find very pure speakers. At least that's what I thought. And I went to look for some of these speakers, and I was introduced by the head of the Assyrian community there in Tiflis. Introduced me to some speakers of Salamas. In fact, it was somewhat difficult. I had, in fact, well, what happened was there were 3 elderly speakers who could speak I was told who could speak the language well. I went to visit the first one, and it turned out that, you know, his daughter answered the door, or I think it was or some relative, and said that, you know, it was my uncle who spoke the dialect very well, but he had a stroke 2 months ago, and he cannot speak anymore. So, you know, his mind seemed to be quite active, but he just couldn't speak. So his language had gone. Then the next person I went to visit was an old woman who lived by herself, who she was very nervous of thieves and burglars, and so she had lots of Rottweiler dogs in her house. And every time I tried to ask her a question or record, these dogs started barking, and I was not able to record anything. I was getting myself somewhat disappointed. Anyhow, the next day, I was taken to the third speaker, and I was taken
third
to
and last. Third and last.
I was taken down these corridors in a sort of old Soviet-style apartment blocks in Tiflis, and I knocked on the door of the apartment of this old lady, and a very small old lady opened the door, looking, must be 95 or more, and she looked very weak, but she was very welcoming. We sat down in the kitchen together, and she gave me tea, and you know, her hand was shaking. She was so weak when she poured out the tea, and I said to her, look, I don't want to exhaust you, because often asking questions, I have to ask questions of people, and that can exhaust people. I said, look, I don't want to exhaust you, but can I just ask some questions about your language? Can I hear some of your language? Because I think you are one of the last speakers who can speak this dialect of Salamas very purely. And at that point, she looked at me in the eyes, and this little hand came out and grabbed my wrist, and she looked at me in the eyes, and she says, "Biqir, modit bibat." That means in Salamas, ask whatever you want. She said, I want you to record everything. I want you to preserve for my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, I want you to preserve my language. And
Do you remember her name, Professor Khan? Do you remember her name?
Yeah, I've got it. It's actually not the top of my head. It's written down. I can send it to you.
I'm just curious. I want to honor her for giving you the opportunity to. I'm
not sure whether she's still alive. Actually, quite frankly, this was.
She is.
Wow. I'm not sure. I said.
I see. Have to check. Mm-hmm. Sorry for interrupting you. Go on, Professor Khan.
But then. But she was saying to me, and this is what moved me a lot, that she was clearly aware of the fact that that her language was part of herself, and was something she wanted to preserve. I mean, and she felt it would have been lost. And she hung on to my wrist, and I was saying to her, look, I mean, about, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour went by, and I said, are you exhausted? I don't want to exhaust you. But she hung on. She said, ask, biqir. And I kept asking more and more questions, and 2 hours went by at least. I was getting tired. She was biqir, and it was, in the end, I ended up by, essentially getting almost the entire language I was able to record. But that was, to me, was very moving, because I realized that it was.
Professor Khan, in a world where the preservation of a subspecies of a bug, of a tree, of a plant, of a fish, is so important to the scientists. It is of a great wonder to me that prior to you, there was no one who thought about preserving an ancient language that is the key and a lens to the past, to the history of mankind. And I am so grateful to you that you have done this in a way no one else that I am aware of has done in the past.
Well, I wouldn't say, you know, I'm by myself, but I'm certainly not. I mean, there have been other people who've done some work. Um, and of course, I'm very much encouraging my students to work on these languages because I'm, I think, you know, it's something I can't do by myself. I mean, this is why I've encouraged for many years my PhD students to work with me, and I've also been trying to raise money for projects to actually employ postdoctoral people, or indeed employ Assyrians, young Assyrians, to train them to work with me. In fact, I've over the last couple of years I've been running together with my students some workshops in Iraq with young Assyrians in Dohuk and in Ankawa. We've been training the young Assyrians to document their village dialects, the dialects of their grandparents, for example, and to record them. But crucially, you know, it's something I can't do by myself, yeah. And so, you know, there have to be people who will continue, you know, and there have to be more students and more people working with me to really complete the job. I mean, just again, going back to this issue about why is it that, you know, people don't see this as an important task. I mean, I think possibly one of the issues is that for the Assyrian people, the ancient past is incredibly important, ancient roots. But what I think is not always recognized is that the spoken language, as I was saying earlier, is itself an ancient language. I mean, okay, it's spoken and today, but I'm constantly trying to persuade the Syrians to understand that they, you know, what's, you know, and it's
That should be an Assyrian motto.
Yes,
because we don't realize that unless you're telling us. We don't realize that. We think we don't know that. Ironically, we don't know that.
You see, you know, that there's a feeling that a statue is more important than your language. I mean, in fact, the point is that these statues or these stones will always remain there. But a statue of a Lamasa or whatever is not at all as rich as your spoken language. And in some respects, it may not even be as ancient. I mean, some of the words you have in your spoken language can be even more ancient than some of these Lamasas you see everywhere. So, you know, it is that is something which I always say to Assyrians. And but I mean, I like to emphasize, you know, what I'm, as I was trying to explain, I'm trying to preserve this big tapestry of the Syrian language heritage. I cannot, I don't feel I can be quite so influential in making or persuading people to keep speaking the dialects, because I mean sometimes, you know, it's almost inevitable that some of these will, I mean, like some of the dialects were spoken in Hakkari now are virtually, most of them, many of them are almost entirely extinct, and some of them inevitably will become extinct. But the thing I'm trying to do is preserve, make a record, and I'm doing this, to say, in both in recording and in writing books, and in working. I'm also creating a website which will be open for everybody. I mean, so
what is the address of your website, Professor Khan? I know it's not up and running fully and it still needs some construction, but what is the, could you give us the address of your website?
Right. So in fact, as I say, we're just changing servers at the moment, so it's not going to be particularly. It's not going to be accessible for another couple of weeks. But it's not. That's not the one at the bottom. This is something else. But the address of the website is nena.ames.cam.ac.uk. So
Does it have a /about at the end?
yeah, well, yeah, but you don't have to do that. You just type it into Google and you'll find
Because when I tried to connect to that without the /about, I wasn't able to connect. It's probably because
no,
your website
the
isn't.
problem is-
But this is what we're showing our viewers here is a snapshot of the website.
Yeah, the point is that the concept is that you can click on any village on a map, and then you can get the dialect and get the recording of stories of storytellers from that village, and you can get the
Unbelievable.
description of the dialect.
Amazing book.
I say it's I like to say it's a safe haven. It's a sort of a safe. I'm not, this project can't give you your country back, but it can give you the kind of record of your culture, and that on the map, you can go to any village, and you'll find the dialects, the recordings, the people, and see. I also, I'm all the time. I'm hoping to develop this. So, I mean, this is why I feel that Assyrians, particularly young Assyrians, can very much get involved with this in various ways. I mean, not only can they help in recording their grandparents or their elderly relatives, but they could also help in, perhaps you could become involved in some way. But I mean, just simple things like finding old photographs of some of the villages would be very helpful.
So, Professor Khan, if somebody is living or has a living grandparent who can speak a dialect in its very pure form, they can contact you, have recordings, and you may perhaps insert it into the website. Is that something that we can do?
They are happy with that. Or if they're not happy with having it on the website, we can archive it so there's a record, because we have, in addition to the website, there's an archive. So it's a sort of a permanent way of preserving things. But the website makes things accessible. In fact, for the last couple of years, I've been trying to persuade young Assyrians to record their elderly, their elderly relatives just with a smartphone. Because I mean, I use, and my students use, digital recording equipment or, high quality video equipment. But I mean, in fact, digital recorders are not that difficult to, they're not that expensive nowadays. But the thing is, smartphones now, I mean, are very, very smart, and they do very high quality recording videos. So I say, you can do a video recording of your relatives speaking. And in fact, I've written some guidelines on how to go about this, just a simple page. So if anybody would like to get involved with me about this, do some recordings of their parents, grandparents, or whatever, and any elderly relatives, just send me an email. You can find my email address on the.
What is your email address, Professor Khan?
It's here we are. It's on down there. I see gk101@cam.ac.uk. If you send me an email, I'll send you the guidelines how to go about the recording. Because it's very simple. Obviously, everybody knows how to use a video on an iPhone, but there are some important things to take into account. You mustn't obviously record in a very noisy room, in a cafe or something. That's that. You have to have some kind of
or with dogs
area.
barking.
Yeah, exactly. and then also you must have the actual phone quite close to the speaker. You mustn't have it to the other side of the room, because then we need to get quite close to the speaker. And then, in the guidelines, I just suggest how to get people to speak. You ask them about their memories, their memories of the village and the memories of their, their marriage. This is what I always do when I ask people to tell about, what were weddings like in the village, in your community? How did people make yogurt? How did they bake bread? What did they sow in the fields? And then, if they do also know any stories, that's excellent. I mean, sometimes they do. I mean, many of the communities I visited in America, for example, and Europe for that matter, often the grandparents are recent immigrants. They feel very lost in the country they've arrived in. They don't speak the language, particularly in places like Sweden or something like that, I think even in English-speaking countries like America. I mean, sometimes the older generation don't speak the local language, and they feel, I think, very sort of alienated in many respects. But and they look, and when I, as a sort of not outsider, come to visit them, they really usually they don't know what to say really. They're very quiet. But then when I start to ask them to sort of talk about their village, speaking to them in Assyrian, of course, and talk about their memories of the village and tell me stories you used to tell when you used to sit in the evening by the fire, then they become alive, and they smile, and and I think that's very moving. And
That is very moving, Professor Khan. It really is. And anecdotally, I have noticed on my own that there is a revival of patriotism among the young people in the West, which is heartwarming and very hopeful. And I am hoping that even though some of these young people who are very patriotic do not speak the language through not the fault of their own, they were not given the gift of the language by their parents or grandparents, they hopefully will use their patriotism and love of the nation to promote their language and start teaching it, having opening schools, and doing a lot more for the language, as they are doing some things politically and culturally. Professor Khan, I am so grateful to Cambridge for having you and allowing you a free hand to do the research that you want. But this all needs funds. And I think as Assyrians, it's incumbent upon us to do as much as we can to help you in your research, documentation, and preservation of our spoken language. Do you have in the US, we're very concerned, or we like our donations to be tax deductible. Does Cambridge have a US tax deductible fund where we can donate to that fund and have a tax deductible too in the US?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'd say that, well, I'd be very, very grateful if there were some donations. I mean, I have to emphasize that these donations are a lot of them are used to actually support young Assyrians themselves. I mean, because as I say, one of the things I've been doing over the years is trying to encourage young Assyrians to work with me, and so I'm doing my best to encourage them either to study with me or to work with me, and I try to support them financially to write together with me on certain projects, and so any kind of funding most of it would a lot of it would go towards supporting young Assyrians, or towards just developing our website to make it established as a sort of fully complete with all the dialects. I mean, that obviously does require some funding. Yeah, I mean, anybody in the US wants to donate, you can easily donate to through what's known as Cambridge in America. I believe down at the bottom of the screen now.
We do have a QR, Professor Khan, and for those who don't know, if you just take your cell phone camera and focus it on the QR and adjust it, close or far, it'll take you directly to the website of the QR. So we have
Right.
Frederick, thanks to Frederick, he has put that QR, and you see it at the bottom left side of our screen here, where you can go directly to the Cambridge website for the donations. And these donations, Professor Khan, I know, I'm sure Cambridge receives a lot of donation, being such an outstanding world-class university. They receive a lot of donations. Is there any way that someone can go to the website and specify that they want to have their donation go directly to the research work that you do on the Assyrian preservation?
Well, yes. Well, I mean, I was going to say two very important things. First of all, if you donate money through Cambridge in America, this link you've just been shown, it is tax deductible. I mean, it's through American tax law. So
501c.
Charitable status. And secondly, if you go there, you'll see you have to say, who you want to support and what you want to support, and you simply say you want to support the Professor Geoffrey Khan on the Modern Assyrian Language Project. But I mean, I think I would encourage people to write to my email address as well, so I can, if there's any kind of doubt or lack of clarity, I can explain that.
Absolutely. I hope that many Assyrians.
You're sending it to me, but for my Assyrian or Modern Assyrian Language Project. I think
Professor Khan, time is always short with you. Last time we spoke in Assyrian for an hour and a half. It was short. This time it was shorter. And we can never have enough of you, enough of your knowledge, enough of your love. But I need to get something off my chest, if I may. Last time when we spoke, as I mentioned, for an hour and a half in Assyrian, and you astonished me with the breadth of knowledge of the Assyrian language. This time we spoke in English. I need to confess to you that it was a little odd, unnatural to me. And then I realized during our interview that I have internally recognized you as an Assyrian brother. And just as I am not comfortable speaking with my family, Assyrian family and friends in English, I am not comfortable speaking to you in English. It is because of how I am receiving you inside my heart. And this is a compliment to you, not because you have fantastically mastered our Assyrian language, but it is because of your unconditional love, compassion, and dedication to a language that many consider dead and forgotten. And that is so invaluable to me that my wish is, if I can do it on Shamiram Media set, in my small world, and though I'm not Queen of England, I'm the queen of my own world, I would like to knight you as an Assyrian brother. Sorry, the British people, you can call him Assyrian British. To me, you are an Assyrian who has done wonders for our language, and the consequences, not the consequences, but the gratitude will go on forever for what you've done. It's unprecedented and invaluable. And like you mentioned before, you cannot do the breadth of work that you're doing without just the scientific wants. There's more to that. And as you mentioned, it's the love that you have for perhaps you said you came from a broken home and you wanted to make another broken home, a broken nation whole. And I am trying to hold back my tears, because who can do that? Who has dared to do this in the past but you? And I hope your students who work with you will feel confident in passing the torch. But before passing the torch, I want you to live many more decades as a selfish Assyrian. I want that for us. I thank you so much for being with us, and I hope that we can speak to you again, Professor Khan. Geoffrey John, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm very touched.
Much adoration and love to you from me. Take good care. Basim Raba, Mughibid, Shamiran Media. Thank you, the viewers of Assyrian Network and Shamiran Media. I think Professor Geoffrey Khan said all that is needed to be said about our language and the crucial desire to preserve it, so your grandparents and your ancestors who shed bloods because they called themselves Assyrians, they were not willing to convert to anything else. In their honor, let's keep our language. Hamzumun lishanochun. Basim Raba. Good day.
إيمان وايلة أكسيدنت اتنرابا ناشا ليعطي متبصل طاقة شكلي. اتلا نسيانة بدنا كيسس ات انجري لو و بيالباية قريمخ. إن آتن ينكل باتت بيتا خزموخن يطانة اتلوخن بوقارة مخبرون المنيان التلفون 8 أربع شوا وچا 8 تري وچا 5 خا اشتا يعني توكن بيت injuryrights.com. شمي إلى توني كالغراكس كي يمزمن لشان خلية يما.
OpenVPN, connecting your world securely. We believe all people should have unfiltered access to the internet. This will strengthen our society and provide people with equal opportunities. Our mission is to connect your world securely by providing a more safe and secure online experience. OpenVPN is the provider of next-gen secure and scalable communication services. Our award-winning open-source VPN protocol is the de facto standard in the open-source networking space with over 50 million downloads. Visit www.openvpn.net to use our consumer VPN private tunnel or our business VPN solution, Access Server.